I don't know.
For the benefit of any guests we have online, I am Michael Stetzler, Congregation President, Prince of Peace, and I welcome you to this update session for our settled community. And before we kick off our discussion, we're here in a house of worship, and I would like to have Pastor Peter say a few words of prayer. Before I do that, though, I want to call to mind one of the scripture verses which says, "In my Father's house are many mansions," and I'd say a whole boatload of tiny homes.
Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks this night for all of the wonders of creation that you have placed before us, for charging us with particular responsibility to tend to that, to tend to creation, to tend to our neighbors, to take care of one another in those relationships that you have placed us within. Give us special wisdom and insight into how best to do that and how best to move forward to continue being your church, being your hands, your feet, your hugs, your embrace, your encouragement for the sake of our neighbor, for the sake of the world. Bless our time together and keep us safe this night. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. And then I'm just going to quickly say, back here on the back table is this yellow pad. We're going to start a unique emailing list that's specific to stuff around the settlement and whatever else might be transpiring. So if you would like to be a part of and getting those updates, that will still continue to feed information to the congregation as a whole, but there are other community members that are going to be on this list who have specific interest in what we're doing relative to this and don't necessarily need to know what soup will be served on the third Wednesday in Lent. And so we're going to divide our streams up a little bit. That kind of stuff. So,
Thank you, Peter. And again, for the benefit of our online folks and for some of you here in the audience, I think we need to know who we are. Just want to really quickly go around and just shout out your name.
Rick Rothhausen.
Sandra. Audrey.
Esther Tatley.
Diane Larson.
Tony.
Steve Spale.
Fred from Settle.
Avia and Misha.
Gus.
Yeah, Gary.
Jean. Valerie. Barbara Hart.
Gary.
Chris. Jim Josephson.
Okay, and online, I think we had the Istas. And I'm not seeing who else we have. We got Evan Berquist joining us. Evan, would you like to introduce yourself?
There actually.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Evan Berquist. I'm delighted to be able to join you tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I had a meeting that I'd committed to that just wrapped up at 6:30, and so the only way I could do it was Zoom. I like to, would prefer to be there in person and hope to meet you all in the flesh soon. That's much better than Zoom, but this was the way that we could be together tonight. So thanks for your patience, and wish I were in the room. And if you all could please just clue me in about anything going on in that room that I can't see. My wife was raised in a Lutheran church. I've done this work, related to religious liberty and trying to serve the homeless for the last few years. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege, really. And I'm, grateful that you've taken on this work as a congregation and for your trust in me to invite me here tonight. And thanks.
Thanks, Evan.
he's a lawyer and works with the Crozen law firm.
Yeah, well,
For settled or?
Now for us. We'll talk about that.
We'll get to that. I just want a real quick recap. You all know how we got called into this work of providing shelter, and Valerie's joining us as a temporary resident back in the summer with her bus, and how we found a way to keep her warm this winter by we, not when we and a number of other churches and of course the whole settled community. So that's where we are now. Tiny homes are not a close fit into the housing situation. That is, most cities don't have a plan for how you incorporate tiny homes. It gets a little bit confusing. Are they houses? Are they RVs? Are they permanent? Are they, what kind of code do they need to make? That sort of thing. Well, our belief is that as a religious institution, we are called to serve those in need, and housing is a part of that. And that when we were called to provide this shelter over the summer, that's part of what we are as a church. And therefore, we went ahead assuming that what we were doing was within the scope of our mission as a church, and therefore was right and good. We also knew that sometime down the road, based on the experience of Mosaic and Settled, working with the city of St. Paul, that the longer we did this, the more likely it would be that the people who administer the codes and try to make everybody comply with stuff in the city would wonder how the heck we fit into their system. And so not too long ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, Peter met with the city planner who supportive, wanted to know what we were doing, understood that what we were doing was partially because the city asked us to. But there are a lot of things to figure out. And the path forward, according to that city planner, was that we needed to be, they needed to create an opportunity for us to, I guess, fit within the system. And the first step in that was to cite us for non-compliance. Now, that doesn't sound like the best way to go about things. You know, it's like, okay, we really want to help you here. Come on to a hearing, cease and desist, which is one option they gave us, cease and desist. We won't do that. You know, another option they gave us was to come up to code, install electricity, plumbing, and so forth, and blah, 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 blah. Oh, that either. So the third thing was to appeal. And that's where we are today. The appeal was issued, or the citation was issued to us. The window during which we need to appeal is between now and
Friday.
Friday.
What we received our formal notice on February 1st.
Okay.
We have 10 days to respond.
10 days to respond. So those of you that wondered what Evan Berquist is doing here for us, when we got the notice, when we knew we were going to get it, we reached out to Settle and asked them how to proceed with this. They have quite a bit of experience working with the legal side of this. And one thing and another, we got connected up with Evan and his firm, and Evan agreed to represent us pro bono in the first phase of this, getting the appeal put together and done. And that's basically where we're at. Today, I signed a letter of engagement, which formally retains Evan and his firm as our representatives in this appeal process. And now we're trying to figure out how we need to prepare for that appeal. What's our message? How do we don't even know exactly what we're appealing.
We should have Evan describe the tenor of the response that he's prepared for us.
Yeah, and before doing that, I should say that my understanding from I wasn't part of the discussions with the city planner. I think I had COVID at the time, but anyway,
Yeah.
it was that it was not antagonistic. It was not confrontational. They really kind of want to find a way to help us with this. And I had a backdoor conversation with a pastor from New Life Presbyterian here when we had our open house for Settled. And he is on one of the, I think the diversity committee, I'm not sure exactly what the title is, but he's on a diversity committee for the city. And he knows a lot of the people in city government and the council and so forth. And he had talked to some people about tiny homes and their workforce housing that they're thinking about. And he sensed that there was good support within the city. We just have to find ways to come together and describe this in a way that allows them to decide what kind of permission structure they need to go ahead with. So that's the appeal process. So Evan, can you take us away and tell us where we're at?
Sure. I think that was a great summary and framing of where we're at and what's ahead of us. The cleaning lady just tried to come in and take my trash away. That's why I was waving here. Then the lights are turned off in my office at 6:30 and I have to go up to the front, to turn them back on. So that's why my office is dark. I have, been in this type of situation before with the city of St. Paul. And that's how I got tied in here. So I just mentioned that by way of context and background to share that a lot of this work comes out in part from the work that other churches have done in the city of St. Paul. Principally this case called First Lutheran of St. Paul, where the city of St. Paul passed an ordinance telling a church that it couldn't operate this daytime drop-in center on its property because the neighbors didn't like it. Essentially, that was what happened. And we told the city that's not legal and we have a right to do this. And they said, yeah, go ahead and sue us. So we did, and we got a judgment from the federal court in Minnesota ordering the city to go ahead and permit First Lutheran, the church, to go and live out its mission and do its work and serve the needy. And as an outgrowth of that decision and our work with St. Paul then permitted and formed basically a committee and a pilot program to allow Mosaic and Settled to create their first sacred settlement of 6 tiny homes at Mosaic's. It's a Nazarene church over kind of in the Payne-Phelan area that started, I want to say 4 or 5 months ago, that the city of St. Paul passed a new pilot program legislation saying we acknowledge that this tiny home community doesn't fit anywhere neatly into our existing zoning code, and it doesn't comply with building and electric and plumbing and water code. But because it's being done by a religious community and in light of the past settlements and court orders from a federal court here in Minnesota, we believe, the city of St. Paul, that the church has a right to do this. And so we're going to accommodate them with Settled. So Settled and Mosaic are 2 different parties, and that's worth clarifying for the group and for everybody as we keep moving forward. Settled and the churches, and I represent Mosaic, I should say that too. We worked with the city of St. Paul. St. Paul finally saw the light, and they have put it in writing that we, the city of St. Paul, believe that the church, under this federal religious liberty law called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, it's a mouthful, but it's a very powerful law. And it's clear that it permits religious organizations to exercise their conscience and their faith free from unreasonable government restraint and interference. And that's basically the legal principle that's going to apply to the work that you all are doing there at Prince of Peace. And our task, as I see it, I just got a copy of the letter on Friday, and that's when I talked to Pastor Peter for the first time. Our task is to help the city of Roseville see that we have rights as a religious organization that we're prepared to defend and advocate for, but we would really prefer that we not over lawyer this or litigate it or get into some dispute that isn't going to serve anybody. And that's the outcome that they came to in St. Paul after some hard-earned experience. And as I was reflecting on this more today, I think that's the core of the message that we want to give to Roseville, is we understand that our tiny home community doesn't fit into any existing zoning law or code structures, but it is a protected religious liberty interest that we are seeking a reasonable accommodation for. And you, the city, would be well served, and you'd be doing justice to your constituents and looking out for your own pocketbook and legal liability if you engage in a bona fide constructive two-way dialogue here about how we permit these two tiny homes to continue to operate on your property as you've been doing. And so we have, as Peter and Michael mentioned, until Friday to submit our appeal. We've drafted a letter, notice of appeal from Michael and Pastor Peter, a letter to the city manager. There's a procedure under the Roseville statute to appeal a zoning determination, which is what this is. And in our response, what we're trying to do is basically kind of strike that balance of a proper amount of assertiveness of, hey, we know what we're entitled to here, and you all ought not to go too far down the wrong path, with, you know, not sounding too, you know, confrontational. And that I don't like to be the caricature, everybody's idea of the caricature of the lawyer who thinks the solution to everything is to litigate, because that's not me. I'm a transactional attorney. I just happen to, you know, really be blessed to be a part of this work through a pure coincidence in my work with First Lutheran that started 5 years ago now. And it's clear to me that this is an area of law that deserves more attention and understanding from local governments than it often gets. And I just, you know, want to help be here for you, the church, to provide good advice and counsel as you seek, you know, to go through this journey.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Thank you. I guess we're gonna open it up for questions. Rick?
Are you going to write this letter assuming that there's only going to be 2 tiny homes? Because I think that would be a mistake. We don't have any plans now to do more, but we certainly have more land. And we also have other things going on that land, but it would seem to be that we want to be
Open.
more open about.
Agreed. And that's a point well taken. And I didn't mean to suggest that I would offer up to the city a suggestion that we can only have 2 homes, but the zoning determination letter said, as we currently conduct it with just these 2 homes, even that is not permitted. And that's, to me, an easy, it's just wrong.
It just seems we should soften them up a little bit in case.
Okay, Hudson.
When we started this, and I can remember we were asked if it was okay to have a tiny home in our parking lot temporarily while another piece of property somewhere was being developed so that we could then move in a year and a half this home there. What's happened to that piece of property, and did it get developed, and why isn't that being used?
Let's see, who would have the best information on that? Do you know anything about that, Fred?
Yes, I do. I don't know how that was characterized, okay? But as we're asking Prince of Peace to do proper discernment on whether they would like to become a full sacred settlement, that is also in discussion with a number of other churches. Okay, and I think that's what was alluded to. We are in process of talking with those churches. Obviously, we can't disclose who they are, just like we don't unless they choose to. But I think that's what it was.
Okay, it sounds like there was a whole lot of misinformation because nothing like that came across, and it was just, this is very temporary. And that it wouldn't be over on the land, and that it would be moved to this other piece of property.
Yeah,
Not that we were going to have a committee and sit around and talk about this discernment. So I was just confused because I assumed that was in process.
Gary?
I was just gonna ask Betchen to clarify what property she's talking about. If it's not here on this property south of our property south of the
Right.
building.
It's not our property. It was someplace else,
Okay,
but because this one house was ready, they needed to put it somewhere until that was ready to move there.
I thought
Let
there
me
wasn't room for the last, they only had so many
Right. that-
at Mosaic that they
No,
could
this
get
is a
let
going.
me
This was
recall
supposed
to you
to-
as best I can.
Oh, it wasn't
I
Mosaic?
would be responsible for that earlier communication. Probably as much as anybody. And what I believe we said at the time was that the intent on this was not to see it as a first step toward a larger settlement, which may be an option if we chose it later on, but that was not the intent. The intent was to call it an interim sacred settlement. Interim during the period of time it took for a more complete permanent sacred settlement to be developed. And as Fred has said, our understanding was at that time and is today that there are a number of congregations who are in that process. Now, we didn't know exactly where those congregations were in that process. We still don't. What we had said was that our best guess was it would be at least until next fall before an alternative site would be open. And it could be longer. That's the way I think we described it to people. Anybody recall that?
I heard, what I heard was that we were, there was a need for Valerie. We needed to have a place for Valerie and it was overflow for Mosaic. That's kind of how I heard it.
Right,
And so we were the part of Mosaic, but we were overflow because they either, I don't know what the situation is there, but they either couldn't, they were already maxed out on their allowed amount of people or whatever. And that that this was a long-term temporary, permanent temporary, or whatever it developed into. I don't know.
It seems like there was a lot of misunderstanding.
Possibly.
there was a lot of ambiguity in it. I wouldn't say misunderstanding, except that you cannot create certainty where certainty does not exist, so we
Right.
knew that there was a lot potentially in the process, and there still is. Steve.
My understanding simply was that we were taking this on an interim basis, that there were other congregations in the planning process, and because they were a little further ahead than we would be, that it was likely to be an interim situation with the possibility, if we chose to seek a more permanent settlement in the future, that would be
Yeah.
the option that we could pursue. But that there were others that were kind of in the line in front of us.
Right, that's what I intended to convey. I think that's what we tried to have our message be. Sorry if there was confusion in it, but that was our intent. And when the city talks about this being regarded by them as permanent, that's their take,
Mhm.
because anybody who lives in an RV more than 2 weeks at a time, I understand it from their code, is considered permanent. So it's like, if we had brought an Airstream and travel trailer in here over the summer and they stayed there for more than 2 weeks, well, that would be a code violation. And that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with here. So don't ask me to explain the code or how to rework it or whatever, but just don't take the city's view that it's permanent as a statement of fact.
Yeah. So like what I'm hearing is that the only reason we're looking for permanent is just because we're extended over 2 weeks. But what our long-term goals are unknown at this moment.
That's right.
Yes, are unknown. And that brings me to another thing, which is that we have, I believe, most of the affordable housing team here tonight. The affordable housing team endorsed the tiny home project with the condition that this did not stop any discussions they would be having or foreclose any planning process that looked at other ways to meet the affordable housing need with the resources that we have. And one of the things that our covenant with settled requires is for us to take a good faith look at whether expansion into a permanent sacred settlement is what we are called to do is in our interest. But that's all we're committed to do, is to study that, which will be done in relationship to other types of things. For example, we had Gabriel Claudius here for a forum 3 or 4 weeks ago. And one of the questions that came up was, well, since we have looked at children, families with children as the target for the affordable housing initiatives we have been discussing, is this tiny home model adaptable in any way to meet the needs of that population? And her answer was yes. Of course, that's a possibility. Look at it. So we're at the stage where we're called to dream about what this should or shouldn't be. How does it meet our mission? Well, now we have our mission, we have our vision, we kind of know who we are, and we've got a little experience with this kind of project. So let's do the planning it takes to move forward. But I think it's a blessing that the city is asking us to engage at this point, because it will give us a heads up on all of those governance issues that would be obstacles potentially if we decided to move forward with tiny homes and possibly with other kinds of affordable housing. Questions? Gary?
Is our attorney, Mr. Burnquist, is he gonna write the appeal with your, or he has written it? With
Basically,
your,
I think what our situation is, we just have to tell them we do plan to appeal.
okay,
The actual content of the appeal remains to be worked out, right?
but he'll work on that with you and Pastor Peter, is that the idea?
Yes.
And actually, let me set this real quick. And Fred, maybe you can speak to this as well, and that is, as Evan will describe, his background and his experience is really in that religious land use piece. And it's not understanding zoning and building codes and those compliance issues, which there's a team that worked with Settled and Mosaic. And one of the attorneys that was involved with that just today indicated a willingness to get involved with us in this process as well. So the actual content, and as Evan will probably describe in the draft letter, at least the draft that I've been looking at, indicates we would like to appeal, and we will follow up with our rationale. Right. It's, 10 days is not a lot of notice to pull together, all of the rationale stuff. So please know, we'd like to preserve our right to appeal your decision. And we're crafting our completed response. And good news, just today, or just as this meeting was starting, Fred indicated to me that the legal team, or at least a member of that legal team that worked with them at Mosaic and the city of St. Paul on the zoning and building code and ordinance, all that stuff, is willing to work with us in the same capacity. And so I'm really encouraged by that.
Steve?
And my understanding would be that by saying we're going to appeal, it just means we can continue as is. Well, that's in process.
Yeah. The city has not indicated, in fact, they have as much said in other times in our conversations that they don't have an interest in kicking Valerie out. They're willing to concede that she's in a much better situation than she was previously. And so there's a humanitarian issue here at stake as well. And the city, I think that's a very positive sign that they're not coming at us guns blazing here. They're not, it's not a hardcore thing. They're covering their bases because they can't be on record as permitting something that's blatantly against the code, according to, in their mind, without, having clarity around what the rationale is. And so they've been methodical.
Yeah.
They've not been in a big hurry. They just are proceeding. And then the code, the statute, the 10 days, that's city code. They gave us a notice, we have 10 days. That's not their decision to give us 10 days. That's what the city law is.
They've started the
Yeah.
protocol.
And then, so once we ask that appeal, the city code requires the city council to schedule a hearing within 30 days. So that's really the next step, public step in this process. In the meantime, we'll be crafting our what's our response to this and what's our rationale for wanting to move forward? Again, hopefully on the table, everybody will be clear that the religious land use justification that Evan has described is there. It's there, but we're eager to work with the city and their staff and imagine the pathway forward. What they did with St. Paul in their process was they looked at a whole number. So the legal team from Settled and Mosaic, they did all the research. They came up with a variety of different pathways forward for the city to look at this. The city ultimately chose one of those pathways, a Mosaic Sacred Settlement. In the zoning relative to how the city of St. Paul thinks of it, they crafted some language within that arena. Would Roseville do the same thing? Possibly, but there are other options as well. And so we're gonna kind of lay those things out and see. And then in conversation, I'm sure there's going to be staff meetings with us, that will sort of start to navigate and work that pathway forward to think about where it's going. I don't think there's a lot of value in just thinking about 2 homes. Whether we end up having a permanent sacred settlement or not, the real value is, does this model that Settled has developed, would this be a benefit for the city of Roseville? And is it a way for them to address the needs for deeply affordable housing in this community? Could this process inspire another faith community to take on the same thing and allow, and then the city said, we got a way to handle that. You can, here's our stipulations, or here's our code, or here's our, here's the process. And wouldn't that be a gift at the end of the day? Whether we end up being a settlement host or not, to know that that pathway exists and we help to create that, I think that would be wonderful. So, yeah.
So this brings us to the question of how do we prepare for this hearing? What's our job in reaching out to our neighbors, to the world, and talking about what we're up to here? One very important distinction that between Settled and other kinds of affordable housing initiatives is the concept community first. In fact, one of the ways that I would argue that this is should be allowed as a religious enterprise is that it is not housing with services, it is community with housing. And that model really isn't being tested anywhere else in our community. What makes it work? I wish you all could have been at the community dinner that we attended Monday night. Some of us were. Eric, Barb, Valerie was there, of course, and boy, the joy and the community in that Mosaic community is just wonderful. And you have people coming in from Woodland Hills and trying to think of the other Lutheran churches that were represented. There are people who are not intentional neighbors necessarily that live there, but that are supportive friends that just kind of got hooked in, and now they've got relationship with people, and they all come together and celebrate on this community dinner night. And we're going to have one of those on March 6th, which will be within that 30-day time period. So we'll have a chance to taste what that's like. The community first model is really a big part of this. I would like us to all understand it as deeply as we can. To that end, we are planning to have a book study on a book called Welcome Home Less. Some of you have heard of it. We just got a stack of these books. We haven't set the date yet. I know Diane Larson has agreed to consider leading the study group. So if you're interested in that process, let me know. I've got a few books here. We can always get more. But I'm guessing that sometime early in March, we'll start looking at that so that we can talk to our neighbors about what this concept is all about. Because it's not just we're going to stick some people in a house and so they've got a nice warm place. It's about building community, and you all that are here know that. You've already seen it. You are community. You're part of the process.
I'm about 80% through that book, and he's not talking about housing so far,
It's community,
but
it's community,
community.
yeah.
Are there plans to invite any of the Roseville City Council members and to this this thing that's happening on the dinner on in March here, so that they can see? Because it is powerful. I was there on Monday and I actually told a friend at work, I'm like, I'm going to this new church and I'm in this new thing that I'm doing and I won't know anybody there. And it was crazy, well, there's people from Prince of Peace, of course, there, but I ran into a family that I had in one of my ECFE classes. And
Yeah.
there, it was just,
This
and
community, this relationship.
this
It's one of our
family.
values, right?
I talked to this mom and dad who had their kids in ECFE in St. Paul 30 years ago. And it was what was I worried about? But it is, I mean, and I really feel like, we could have the council members see and feel that. And then, then they can go back and feel like they're really doing due diligence to all of the residents of St. Paul, of Roseville, the people who pay the taxes and vote them in on the council, because that's really, that's who they're representing, so.
That's an excellent idea. We haven't developed the strategy yet, but the idea has been floating in our heads.
What the steps we have taken around outreach to the council is, I did go over to a city council meeting 2 weeks ago. And just during the open public comment, which is near the beginning of the meeting, I was able to just introduce myself and make them aware of who I am. I thanked them for the commitment they have made to serving the homeless already in our midst by providing for the position within the police department that Carrie McCullough has as the homeless liaison and housing advocate for the city. And made the connection, through Carrie, we have been brought into this process, and I'm eager to share with you what we have been learning as we've been taking care of the person that you sent to us. I sort of, made sure they heard that and were reminded that they were the initiators of this. And so then invited them to come and anytime to come over and see the settlement, to see what we've done and what we've created and show that to them. This is before we got the letter. It was after I knew the letter was coming. Let me put it that way, right? And so I kind of wanted to start imagining I've not had occasion to go to City Hall for a city council meeting. What's the space they're in? Who are these people and personalities? Dan Rowe, our mayor, has been here to Prince of Peace before. He was a familiar face. Turns out one of the other council members had children in school the same time I did at Roseville High School, and our kids were in theater and music together, right? So these are our neighbors as well, right? They represent the city, and so if anybody has any personal connections to any of the 5 of them, there's a mayor and 4 council members. We'd love that. I did follow up that quick just introduction with a personal email to each of them and reiterating my invitation for them to come by and see this. One responded and said, "Why don't you call me and we'll schedule a time?" And so that was Wayne Roth. And I have not heard from any of the others, but doesn't mean I can't follow up and and that kind of stuff. To have an event would be wonderful. We'd want to make sure they in particular were there. And so, that there's some navigating of that. Deb Cordes, a member of our community, has indicated a desire to reach out at the state level. So sort of our state representatives for this area. She's pretty plugged in to a number of the legislators. Also settled and other related organizations do have a lobbying connection at the state level. And there is some pretty exciting legislation being considered right now around homelessness and housing initiatives that support them. And in particular, things that would, at the state level, really push towards this community first model. It is possible that much of that will be in the landscape of, in the air around this as we're working through this process with Roseville, and they may take some comfort and recognition that the state is taking these steps in this direction as well. So anyway, so that's some of the things that have happened so far, but nothing definitive per se, but trying to make those personal connections is really key.
Chris,
I'm assuming that this letter came from the Roseville Code Enforcement Department. I'm not aware, is the council even aware that the letter's been sent to us?
They were not aware at the council meeting where I introduced myself because the letter hadn't been issued yet. And the letter technically came from the city manager. Roseville has a city manager process. So the city manager is the administrative head of staff, and the city development director, Janice Goodlock is her name. That's who I've met with and who has come in and it was her department's ruling that is what we are responding to. And so the city manager is the one who issued the letter, the invitation to either appeal or to cease and desist or
So inviting the city manager may be more important. than
correct.
Council people.
Yeah. Well, the council drives the agenda. And the council, the city manager works for the city council, right? And so, and the mayor, just so you know, the mayor is a council member. There are 5 of them. And the mayor is as mayor, ceremonial head of the city and then runs the meetings. So he has particular ability to drive agenda, but he has no greater voice or vote. So there are five votes on the council, and the council serves as the board of adjustments. And sometimes you have a separate these other entities for different areas of city business. But in Roseville, the sort of the buck stops with the city council. So
we can provide an update on how we're preparing for this before it happens.
Yeah.
It'll be at least a month before. I should say it may be.
Well, I would imagine we'll know fairly quickly
Yeah.
when the hearing or the invitation to come present to the city council will be, and we'll get that date publicized. And truthfully, one of the best things we can do is rally a crowd. Council chambers is a little bigger than this room, and there are about 75 seats in there. And there's a pretty sizable hallway. One would call it a narthex. I don't think they use that word in a city hall, but there's a sizable area just outside the doorway. So it would be not too difficult to show an impressive support by showing up for that particular meeting. Yeah.
Other questions, comments? Evan, do you have anything that you'd like to add before we let you get on with your evening?
Thank you. No, you guys seem to have a really good understanding of, where we're at and what's ahead. It makes my job a lot easier. It's, you guys, you got it. It sounds like, and we're going to continue to be in touch, on the specifics about the letter and the appeal, and Michael and Pastor Peter, you and I will be emailing, and I can come brief, the greater congregation when you all feel that that's appropriate, and just want to say thanks and look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you so much.
Fred, any other things that from Settled's perspective and
Well, just from a technical thing, Evan probably already knows this. The site manager or one of the pastors over at Mosaic, her name is Meredith Campbell, is a lawyer.
Right.
So I am not, and as you all know, if you saw Gabrielle, we are waiting any day for her to be on her maternity leave. It was supposed to have been Saturday, but it hasn't happened as of yet. But to engage always get these names wrong, Eric.
Mhm.
We'll do that through Meredith. She's agreed to sort of take that on, Evan, so you know that. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a retired nobody, but I'm stepping in for Gabrielle while she's
Yeah.
away.
So
Oh, that's
Yes.
wonderful.
settled,
So,
settled, we'll connect with Eric. This is the legal expertise and support
yeah.
around zoning and coding.
Perfect.
yeah,
That's
And-
perfect. Thank you, Fred. I work closely with Meredith. I've heard your name from Gabrielle and Franz, and I'm glad you're gonna help carry the torch while she's out on maternity leave.
yes. We just hope she gets started.
Yeah. You can't begin officially begin until there's a baby.
It's really difficult. She doesn't have anything to do but keep updating me.
Not yet, Fred, not yet, Fred.
So thank you, Evan. It's
Thank
good to
you.
meet you. We'll
Have
meet
a good
sometime.
evening. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoy the conversation about engaging community. It's very important because this model only works based on community. So some other things that we would offer besides, we really are looking forward to the community dinner here on the 6th. Is we also schedule tours of Mosaic. So if you really want to get a peek at what this looks like in that situation, that can be arranged. There are 4 scheduled, I believe. There's actually a 5th, but that's for the legislators at the state. So that shows you how serious that is. Okay, but there are 4 that are open, basically by invitation. Their interest level, okay, type of things, and Meredith conducts those. So it's the manager of Mosaic, the pastor manager of Mosaic, who conducts those. And I would offer that as another engagement process. The other thing is that it could be through your book studies. Now before everything gets settled, and I know you've already done this, with your other housing discussions, is take time to come together and just dream. And the thing, and I've been involved with Settled now for a couple of years. I'm actually an advocate for one of the homeless young men. And then I was asked to fill in for Gabrielle as she is going to go on leave. And then I'm very involved. I don't attend Mosaic, I attend Woodland Hills, but I am like 15 hours a week over at Mosaic doing all kinds of things. But the way I look at it, and if you ever see Mosaic at night, like now, here's the dream. We believe the kingdom of God is arriving. It's here. Okay. There's a duplicity that the kingdom of the world still exists. But Jesus said the kingdom of God has arrived. And that the part that we have is that we are building those lighted cities on a hill. We are setting the banquet table, and we are inviting the disenfranchised, the ones who the world forgot and wants to forget, to the table where Jesus will be host. That is the dream. That is the imagery, okay, of the settlement. And I would invite you to come and see it.
And the people said, amen.
Can I add just a quick thing, Michael, and having been becoming in relationship with the Berries and with Valerie and kind of representing this, trying to create a bridge between our community of our congregation and our people in our tiny homes, is that I don't want this to appear in any way, shape, or form. I really want to honor all those of you who worked so hard on affordable housing in the last couple of years. And I feel like as a Cradle Lutheran, I just need to say both and, that we can do both. that we can be in conversation about continuing a more permanent structure that's for people who can afford to pay us lower reduced rent, and then we can also create and provide community for people who are even below that level, who are coming from nothing. And so I I don't want it, this at all, the continued conversation about coding and zoning in order to accommodate tiny homes, I don't want that to appear at all as if it's throwing out the work that's already been done. I feel like we just need to engage in more conversation so that we can do all of it.
And speaking of engaging in more conversation, I hope you have all signed that email list. We will be gathering soon as an affordable housing team, and the folks that were on that original affordable housing team will obviously get the invitation. But I will send the invitation out to everybody on that list, and those of you that would like to participate in a more full discussion of affordable housing beyond just the tiny home things are surely invited to that. And we'll talk about the process, how do we dream around this whole thing and not, as we say, go down a track simply because it's there in front of us, but to continue dreaming more broadly about what we're called to do. And along with that, I think, Steve, Peter, you're on the adult education team. I think we had talked about having another affordable housing forum coming up, correct?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, what, do you remember what the date is offhand? Well, you look at that. But just as a note on that, there are a couple of things that we wanted to do in that forum. One is to have more of a discussion of this book, Welcome Home List. Also, Susan Hurlbuck, my wife, next week is going to be going down to Austin, Texas, and taking a tour of the original community first settlement down there, which has grown to over 600 homes now. And I'd like to be able to prep her with some serious questions from all of you about what the differences might be between their model and ours and so forth. Have her come back with some pictures and some stories. Gabrielle, who had worked closely with them, and she was working on her PhD thesis, has deep contacts there, and she arranged for us to be given for Susan to be given a special tour by one of the main folks there. So things are going to move again on the whole affordable housing front. So if you're interested in the book club, see me after the meeting. I've got like 3 books left, I guess now. And anybody have any parting comments they'd like to make?
March 26th was forum.
March 26th is the forum. Okay. And my hope is that the affordable housing team will have rethought, where we're headed with that, looked at what the options are that we want to take a deep look at. And let me tie this into our new enlivened vision statement for the church, which calls us to address the most compelling needs in our community. And so one of the things we have to do is figure out how we're going to identify those. What's the process we need to use to know what those needs are? I'm assuming affordable housing is going to be close on the list, but this will be part of that discussion to make sure we're living out our vision. Any parting comments? If not, thank you so much for being here. For those of you online, we didn't give you much of a chance to chip in. This is being recorded, right, Peter? So it will be up on the POP YouTube website for you.
Yep.
And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Peace, you want to send us on the way with a blessing?
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord's face shine on you with grace and mercy. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Amen.